And this month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored in part by Allison Cook, Super Inframan, and Eric Hervin. Thank you all so much for your support. And if you want to become a patron and help support Where Did the Road Go, you can do so at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month. You get extra content all month. You can also support the show through donations off the website or pick up some merch. All available at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight, I am joined by Chris Ernst.
Hey, everybody.
And Adam Gorightly, who has a spectacular book out called Saucers, Spooks and Kooks.
Hello, everybody. Out there in Radio Land.
I think the last time we had you on is for The Hill in the Hole, Chris's movie.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
Sounds about right. Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
No kidding. Yeah, that's right. We were on with that was Bill, me and Bill, and Mr. Gorightly. That's right.
Yeah, I don't think Bill was here, but
he
it was
wasn't?
just you and me. Yeah.
Oh, my
No,
God.
Bill was on that. Bill was on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
He's shy about his knowledge, letting his knowledge seep out into the world. He's a man of mystery. So
yeah, he does seem like that sometimes.
yeah.
So, this book, people were... let me try and rephrase that. People related to this show couldn't stop talking about this when it came out, Adam.
Good to hear.
UFO Disinformation in the Age of Aquarius. And I know Chris in particular loved it the minute it came out, but among the co-hosts of this show, everyone just absolutely loved this, and so did I. This was published when?
Back in March of this year, as I recall.
And it came out on Daily Grail.
Uh-huh.
So,
and I've been writing it for ages. Going back, probably around at least 10 years. And the reason it took so darn long is because originally it wasn't intended to be a full-length book. It was just an article I was writing. It was going to be entitled My Breakfast with Tao, and people who have read the book know what that chapter is about. But it evolved over time, and I had other book projects, so it kind of got set aside, and eventually we can get into this more a bit, but Tao was connected to the Dulce base story, and after starting that article, My Breakfast with Tao, he was telling me about his involvement in promoting the Dulce base story, and so I started looking into that more deeply, and it kind of evolved into an article I was going to call Deconstructing Dulce, and when it got to be about over 10,000 words, it's like, wow, this topic connects to a lot of the other stories in UFO history dating back, the last 40 years or so. And so this kind of connecting all these things together and just continued to blossom, and I finally got it finished last year. So
the what I feel is so important about this book is it pretty much is the stuff that the people in the current UFO field, like the new people coming in, don't know about, that we're seeing happen all over again. Like same patterns, even same people in some cases, and it's like, and you're systematically showing how this has happened numerous times in the past.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and a lot of the same characters pop up, and they're pivotal to what was going on, like back in the early 70s with Hal Puthoff and Kit Green and their involvement in the Stargate project, which was basically, working with psychics, doing remote viewing, a project that was funded covertly by the CIA. So you have all these spooky intelligence links, and once again, some of these same players like Hal Puthoff, who is still active currently, most recently with Robert Bigelow, and then later to the Stars Academy, which gets people to questioning what's going on here. Is this a long-going counterintelligence operation, or is there multiple agendas with all these characters? But it's this kind of same narrative with some of the same storylines that have been going on for quite a while now.
So tell us about Tao. Who is Tao?
So I didn't really know who Tao was. I kind of might have been somewhat familiar with the name, but in 2007-ish, 2008, and I tell this story in the book, so I guess I'll go ahead and relate it here. I got this email from an anonymous emailer saying they were working on trying to develop a television series called Mysterious Mariposa. Mariposa is a mountain town near where I live in the central Sierras. And so this anonymous emailer was hitting me up because I guess he heard from somebody I lived in the area, asked if I knew about any paranormal stories, and he also mentioned that he had helped produce a recent episode at that time of UFO hunters on underground bases. And once again, there was no name attached, just the email, which was Quest and Tao, T-A-L, one word. And so I hit up Bill and Nancy Burns saying, hey, because I'm sure you guys get all kinds of wacky emails sometimes. Is this person legit or what's going on here? And both Bill and Nancy, Bill in particular, said, yeah, this guy knows things. He's Tal Levesque. I go, that name's familiar. Mm-hmm. And so I started learning more, and he's really one of the most fascinating characters in like UFO and paranormal and conspiracy research in the 70s, 80s, up until his recent death in 2018. And so I started interacting with the guy and found out, he went way back. He was friends with Richard Shaver, of all people, back in the day, which was pretty interesting. And back in the 70s, he put out a zine with his wife, Mary Martin, called The Hollow Earth Hassle. So he was into the Inner Earth mysteries back in that period. And, recently, maybe 5 years ago or so, Timothy Beckley's publishing house put out the best of the Hollow Earth Hassle. So they were like the scene makers for people into that back in the day. And it was something, that evolved out of the Richard Shaver and the Shaver mysteries, where Shaver told all these wild stories about how he had tapped into kind of, something like the Akashic records, what he called racial memories, and he had these memories of Lemuria. That was the first story that came out of the Shaver mysteries. Right, I'm sure you guys heard of. I remember Lemuria, and the basic story was that way back millions of years ago, space people had came to Earth, the Atlans and the Terrans, they were called in the Shaver mysteries, and basically they got the sun screwed them up over time and started affecting their health and their psyches, and they had to either get the hell out of the planet, so those with spaceships bugged out, but those who couldn't took refuge in the inner Earth to get away from the sun, and that created this devolved and deranged race of these evil little guys called the Diros. And so, that became kind of a phenomena there in the 40s, from like 43 to 1949, and through amazing stories. And you had this fan base emerge of these people who started writing in and claiming they had their own shaver mystery stories and interacted with the Deros. Fred Krisman, if you know that name, he wrote in and claimed he battled in underground caverns with the Deros. So Tao Levesque was fascinated by this and kind of continued that tradition into the 70s and the 80s. And once again, it was like a group of people who wrote into the Hollow Earth hassle and shared their adventures, like exploring these inner Earth caverns with claims that there were entities also living in the inner Earth. So, it's kind of a subculture that eventually evolved into the Dulce base mythos to a certain extent.
It's funny. And I'm sure you've thought of this too. I can't remember if you specifically talk about it in the book. It's very similar to some of the stuff that we saw more recently. These like AR, or LARPs like Ong's Hat. Or these, I could even go as far as to say Q, and I know that you've, written about that as sort of a movement. But that whole scene where, you're basically, it's like fan fiction that then becomes this like role playing where people are, they're engaging in it and they're pretending that, they're play acting within there.
Sure, yeah, you could see it as a LARP, and you could also see, the Dulce base mythos as a LARP to a certain extent, although there were things going on in Dulce that were quite, what's the word? People are having genuine experiences and seeing actual things there that could have been a number of things like stealth technology, etc., or secret government projects going on.
So when tell people a little bit about the whole Dulce base thing, where it comes from, and how it kind of got out of control.
So it really seems to have started with the Bennewitz affair. Which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with. And, there's books already out there. Project Beta by my buddy Greg Bishop looked into. And there's been a few others. Ex Descending by Christopher Lambright. And even Gabe Valdez's son, Greg Valdez, wrote a pretty good book on his experiences in Dulce. But it came from the Bennewitz affair, and so there was a couple aspects of the Bennewitz affair, and how deep do we want to get into the background on that?
Well, let's skip over the deep background on that. I mean, basically, he was being fed disinformation. Right.
And some of that disinformation, and, part of it might have been his own, he'd get bits and pieces of disinformation or maybe misinformation from other people, and there's obviously some confabulation. He ran with some of these stories, but one thing happened in 1980. There's the famous case of Myrna Hansen, who was driving with her son through Eagle's Nest, New Mexico, pretty close to where we were doing some of the filming, Chris, and she had she witnessed a UFO that shot down a beam and sucked up a cow into the craft. This was like 1980 once again. Shortly afterwards, she and her son were beamed up in the craft, and she claimed she saw the aliens slicing and dicing, mutilating this cow on the ship. This was somewhat early on with the cattle mutilation were going on in that area. And so after her experience, she was quite unsettled, horrified by her experience. She went to the local state troopers there in Cimarron, New Mexico, and they didn't know how to deal with her, but they knew about Gabe Valdez, who was a state trooper, worked out of the Dulce area, had been looking into the cattle mutilation phenomenon for a few years by then, and also how UFOs seem to be related to a lot of those sightings, and to those mutilations. So the Cimarron troopers called in Gabe Valdez because he was kind of the go-to guy, and Valdez was friends with Paul Bennewitz, who was actively involved in cattle mutilation and UFO research, and was also a physicist, worked on government contracts, so kind of like a brainiac dude who was really looking into this stuff, kind of a genius in his own right, who went over the edge. But he got involved in the Myrna Hansen case, and he brought in Leo Sprinkle, another name you might be familiar with, who during that period was doing hypnotic regression for abductees, kind of the early stages of the phenomenon when people got active in that stuff. They were all connected to the UFO organization APRO. And so anyway, they set up these regression sessions at Bennewitz's house in Albuquerque, brought in Leo Sprinkle, and they conducted the sessions in Bennewitz's Lincoln Town Car. He had a brand new Lincoln Town Car, and he was adamant that they wrap it in aluminum foil, because even by that time he'd become convinced or suspected that the aliens were going to try to screw around and kind of try to undermine their regression sessions, basically, send beam or try to block Myrna Hansen from telling what went on. So that was one of the curiosities. He's wrapped the Lincoln Town Car in foil, and during the regressions, she recounted, of course, her sighting there in Eagle Nest. But then they had a series of these regression sessions, and as they progressed, she claimed that at one point she had been taken to a secret underground base, and while there, went through the usual medical procedures and whatnot, and at one point she escaped from her alien captors and was running through this underground facility, and she witnessed, or claimed she witnessed, the alien hybrids and vats and that whole thing that later cropped up in a lot of stories like X-Files and whatnot. And so for a number of reasons, Bennewitz began to suspect that this secret underground base was in Dulce, New Mexico. Other people suspect that Richard Doty kind of pushed him in that direction, because they were trying to get him. Bennewitz had lived next to Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, and had been picking up on what he thought were UFOs over the base, and capturing signals and stuff. And actually, it was the testing of secret craft there. And so right. Doty, who worked for AFOSI there at Kirtland, the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, part of what he did was kind of divert Bennewitz's attention to Kirtland and push him out toward Dulce, where they could more like stage stuff, and as part of this counterintelligence campaign, because Bennewitz was picking up on these secret experiments and stuff, and they were pushing the alien narrative on him to hide what was going on there. So anyway, the other part of how the Dulce base started was the rumors were that so Bennewitz became alarmed at what was going on, and he started contacting politicians, state senator or U.S. senators like Pete Domenici and Harrison Schmitt, a former NASA astronaut, informing them that a few things, that there was this alien invasion going on, and that there was also this secret base out at Dulce. In one of the early letters he wrote, even to Ronald Reagan, I think he sent some to the White House, he stated that somehow he had gotten wind that at some point there had been a confrontation. There was a secret treaty between the humans and aliens at Dulce. The aliens would share technology, and the humans would provide human subjects to experiment upon. And that was Bennewitz's belief, and part of that was, not to get off on too much of a tangent, but part of that was fed to him by a computer the Air Force gave to him, embedded with software that allowed him, or at least he thought, to communicate with the aliens. It gets pretty deep with all this stuff, but this early letter he wrote, he talked about this confrontation where the humans had abandoned the base, or they'd either been killed, and he also claimed he was working on this space gun to kill the aliens, and that he had almost finished this. He was trying to get some government funding as well. So I'm all over the place here, but that's kind of where this the original Dulce base story started around 1980.
So was the tinfoil hat thing come from that, or did he utilize the tinfoil in a different, like in a more extensive manner than that sort of idea was already out there?
I don't know if people were talking about tinfoil hats in 1980, and I don't know if it was based on Bennewitz's wrapping foil around his Lincoln Town Car, but there's some other letters where I read where he was really adamant about, and he wrote a whole paper on it, and was part of this paper called Project Beta, where he outlined the protocols for hypnotic regressions, and that they had to be, it's kind of like going in, to a secure space, like, they talk about a skiff now for intelligence matters. So he was very aware of like these security protocols, so other people couldn't listen in or screw around with the different regressions he was involved with.
Mm-hmm. It seems like a lot of the mythology that comes to be associated with UFOs and all this other stuff came from this.
Yeah, it sure seems like, and I mean, and a lot came from that period with also the cattle mutilations were involved in this whole caper, and the underground base story and the alien hybrids. And I mentioned about there was a supposed takeover of the alien, of the base, of this joint base by the aliens, and they either killed or kicked the humans out. And that's another thing that's become a trope in ufology over the years. That story has been repeated time and again with different little tweaks. And of course, you had people like later, like Phil Schneider, who showed up and claimed that he had been involved in one such alien base battle.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
There was something else I was going to ask about what you just said, and I lost it. Okay. Oh, well, let's talk about cattle mutilations for a minute. What are your thoughts on this?
So how they seem to relate to the Dulce base story really has to do with, I write a bit about Project Gas Buggy.
Yeah.
That project by, I guess was the Atomic Energy Commission in 1967. They did these underground atomic explosions. They were trying to release natural gas so they could tap into that, but it, like an early form of fracking. Mm-hmm. But it did not work so well, and released the gas into the atmosphere, and also radiation. So I think that is related to the cattle mutilation story, or is definitely part of it, and that Project Gas Buggy was near the Hickory Indian Reservation, where the area of the so-called Dulce base, and it created this huge cavern, and some people later speculated that these caverns were later used to create some type of underground facilities out in the area, but we can get back to that. But so the cattle mutilations really got going in the Southwest around 75 or so. And one of the theories behind them, particularly in the kind of Dulce area in the Hickory Indian Apache Reservation, is that the radiation had got into the cattle herds there, and that there was a secret government project to basically excise bovine bungholes or different parts of the cow. Their tongues were often cut out to measure them for radiation. And like some of the other stories, going on with Kirtland Base and Doty, and there's possibility that this was the cattle mutilations were kind of used as a cover, inserting the UFO narrative. A lot of times there was lights, UFO type lights seen with them, and other stories blamed it on the Satanists. Bringing in a lot of these different theories to muck up what was going on around with the cattle mutilations and the UFOs related that were often seen in the same area, and also the helicopters, and I get into it quite a bit of depth in the book, but that's something that Gabe Valdez started looking into it, and that's how he got interested in the topic, trying to find out what the hell was going on, because he was a rancher and he worked with other ranchers. For instance, I don't know if you guys are into car racing, but the Unser brothers, Bobby and Al Unser,
No.
they had a ranch out in those parts, and they were experiencing the mutilations too, and that's how Valdez was friends with them, and they were also the Unser brothers were friends with these U.S. senators, Pete Domenici, for instance, and that's how different politicians got involved in the case to see what was going on, because they were losing a lot of cattle, and how, once again, this related to some of the odd doings going on with Doty and Kirtland Air Force Base, and some of the stuff that Doty was involved with in the Dulce area. And eventually, all of this led to Doty getting in trouble because, boy, maybe I'm getting too complicated here, or too deep in the weeds, but those are kind of the basic outlines of, you had the UFOs and the cattle mutilations. They seemed to be related, and there was multiple stories, and there were spooks looking into this. Doty was involved, and Valdez and a friend of his, another rancher, Edward Gomez, were looking into it, going out to Archuleta Mesa, where supposedly this base was, and they were getting their phones bugged. I mean, Gabe Valdez actually found bugs that were tapping his phone. So there's all this skullduggery and intrigue, and part of it was a disinformation campaign and secret government projects going on.
So do you think, I mean, looking at, like, reading through someone like O'Brien's cattle mutilation book, it seemed like a lot of these probably have prosaic explanations, but then there's the handful of cattle mutilations that are just really weird.
Yeah, sure. Well, a lot of them are pretty damn strange if you read Chris O'Brien's book, and David Perkins, who really helped me out with this project quite a bit. He was one of the, well, you could call him even like the first cattle mutilation researcher, that
Right.
yeah, there's a lot of high weirdness involved with some of the stories, at least some of the counts. I don't have all those anecdotes on the top of my head, but we really don't know, and he doesn't know either. I mean, the prosaic answer to this, which is still kind of bizarre, that it was a secret government project. There's a lot of evidence for that, but then there was many other cases that Perkins, for instance, just couldn't find a rational answer for.
Right.
He got involved. I think, I'm not sure if he writes about it in his intro to my book, but he was came out to New Mexico and he had graduated from, now I'm forgetting, I think he was a graduate from Yale in sociology, so smart dude. And he was interested in the counterculture back in the day, so he moved out and he lived in a commune out in that Four Corners area, New Mexico, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
What was it called? I forget the name of the commune, but he was... he found just happened upon a mutilation one day in that area, not too far from his home, and so he started looking into it, and he was questioning people because there was, there was oddities. There was, the things we talked about before, like surgical remover, almost like a laser or something.
Yeah.
Removing the bunghole, tongue, and eyes and stuff, and
Right.
It was weird. And so he started, he became aware of that case, and he was in contact with the cops, and they they looked into it, and they actually followed a trail of little blood droplets close to his home. And they, at one time, they thought, initially they thought he was a suspect in the case, but he wasn't. But that's how he got involved in it. And he was really the one who introduced Linda Moulton Howe, or got her involved in the topic with her movie Strange Harvest. She basically contacted him because she had heard some stories, and Perkins had an immense amount of files and stuff, so he packed those up one day. This was in Colorado, in what he called the Mute Mobile, and drove them to Linda, where she was working at a television station. I guess it was in Colorado, and eventually he ended up introducing her to a lot of his contacts, different witnesses to the cattle mutilation. That, of course, led to her movie, which kind of springboarded the whole cattle mutilation topic. Once again, Strange Harvest, and it was 1979.
Yeah.
So and Linda is another one that got kind of victimized by this disinfo.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, she was successful with Strange Harvest in '79. She shortly after that got tapped by HBO to do a UFO documentary, and so she was working on that, and so she was looking at the cattle mutilation cases, how they were related to UFOs, interviewing people like Gabe Valdez, etc., who put her in touch or made her aware of what was going on with the Bennewitz story. And so she was interested in that case for sure. And she had also picked up on the Cash-Landrum incident, another famous one there. And, Doty was involved in both of these cases. And so what I think happened, what appears to happen, is that Doty became aware of that and got in touch with Linda Howe. And I recount the incident in the book, and she writes it about in her book. I think her book's Alien Harvest, where she had this spooky session with Doty at Kirtland Air Force Base, and once again, in like a skiff or a secret room. It's like something out of a spy movie, the way she told it. And she was shown these documents. She couldn't she could just, it was all, you could look at them for 10 minutes or whatever. And these documents appear to have been, stuff Doty started circulating, and also materials that later ended up in the MJ12 papers and other hoaxed materials. And the basic, what was passed on to her was that, there was a secret treaty between the human and aliens, and that there was this crash at Roswell. There was a couple crashes, and they retrieved an alien, and this alien was still alive. And Doty told her at that time, if she played her cards right, she would get to interview the alien, and that they would help her with her HBO documentary, which he never did. He left her high and dry, passed her on to other contacts in the intelligence community and Air Force, whatever, that left her dangling in the wind, and kind of undermined her prospective HBO documentary. And one could posit that that whole operation was to discredit her and to once again disinform her about what was really going on with the Bennewitz affair and the Cash-Landrum incident.
That's one thing that I've always felt about Linda Moulton Howe, is that, like, at least in the very beginning, I feel like she's very, there's a certain level of sincerity and, measured interest in being a researcher, and that, like, she really got put through the ringer.
Yeah.
Yep. And even to this day, she still stands by the documents and what Doty told her, even though time and again he's been exposed to be a pretty sketchy guy, passing along sketchy information. Yeah. So I don't know.
There was you talk about Bennewitz having orbs in his house.
Yeah.
Right.
Bizarre, huh?
And do you think that was like military, or do you think that was some actual weirdness going on?
So you had, it probably was some intelligence operation. I mean, once again, we don't know for sure, but and some of these, bits and pieces of these stories get confirmed by more than one source, but there's other parts. It's like, well, it's just something that Bill Moore said or Doty said. But with the Bennewitz affair, I told you they'd given him this computer, and according to Bill Moore, and this first came out in Greg Bishop's book, Bill Moore was having adult beverages with J. Allen Hynek at some point during this period. Hynek was still working contract with the Air Force. This was post-Project Blue Book, and he claimed that Hynek told him that Hynek had passed along this computer that was embedded with the software to speak with the aliens, and also it generated these very primitive images of these kind of reptilian or serpent-looking aliens. And at the same time, according to some accounts, the NSA had moved across and were in a townhouse monitoring Bennewitz. And part of it was, not only was he seeing UFOs over Kirtland that were probably stealth technology, that different, secret technology they were working on, but he was also picking up these signals of a laser-based system that, talked to satellites, and whether super secret project. They didn't want to get out, so that's what they were concerned with. So they wanted to disinform him, confuse him. He was picking up these signals. He was trying to figure out what they were. He figured out that some of it was like gibberish. If he slowed it down and he started picking out stuff. And so The Air Force intelligence got involved with NSA, and he had this computer, I guess, disinforming him. But there's also he also started seeing these orbs around his house, and Bill Moore claimed he saw them too. Doty as well said they snuck into Bennewitz's house at one point, and they themselves saw these orbs, which were, I guess they're kind of bluish, floating around. I mentioned Gabe Valdez in his book talked about similar orbs that were used in recent years in military operations as kind of tracking devices they would send out to a target, before they bomb it or whatever. So it could be something like that. But it, what those could have been were just kind of monitoring some type of monitoring devices. I don't know. Different accounts say there were solid. Other accounts, it's not too clear, but they could have been there monitoring his activities. He also claimed that he would get scanned sometimes. And Bill Moore was one there one time. He said he also felt the scan going over him, almost like a microwave type of device, similar to what we're hearing about some of these stories.
Syndrome.
Yeah, some of that stuff going on. So ultimately, all this stuff drove Bennewitz over the edge. He felt he was under siege. They had to put him his family had to put him in a mental facility for a period of time, because I know there was one account when he really hit the height of paranoia. He was just chain smoking cigarette after cigarette, claiming the aliens were coming through his door and shooting him up with drugs. So it sounds, classic example of Operation Mindfuck here going on. Now, how much the government was responsible or bad actors, or how much he can fabulated this, or, just got super paranoid delusional, once again, it's not clear, but he certainly did get screwed with to a certain degree.
So you talk about Gulf Breeze in here too, and Gulf Breeze always struck me as interesting because it seemed like a lot of people were having the same experiences there as far as seeing these craft. Do you think there was anything genuine going on?
Well, the Ed Walters stuff seemed pretty hoaxed or funny, but I can't say I looked at all the Gulf Breeze cases, but I just want to touch on the NSA involvement with that group, the Gulf Breeze 6. And when I first started looking into the Bennewitz stuff, there's Bennewitz in some of his papers said NASA was monitoring him, but I think he was confused or misinformed, and that it might have been the NSA. But I asked myself, and when I was looking into this, why was the NSA involved with this Air Force investigation? But I found that's pretty darn typical in a lot of military bases. You do have people from the National Security Agency that come in on details and work with the Air Force, and etc. So it's not out of the question that NSA was also involved in the Bennewitz affair. But there was the group called the Gulf Breeze 6, who were stationed. They were with the Air Force or the military in East or was it West in Germany. Kind of the same time Doty later ended up there, but and they were working with NSA analysts, and they started getting information that once again about some type of alien invasion going on, that type of thing. And there was 6 of them, and they bugged out from their post in West Germany and went to Gulf Breeze because they were informed by some spirit entity that a UFO was going to land there, which became this Gulf Breeze 6 affair. They were later picked up and arrested for AWOL, but later accounts were that they believed part of it, there was going to be a saucer landing and that there was going to be a battle against the Antichrist, and they had been informed, at least one of them, that Ed Walters was the Antichrist, and he so. Wow. I'm not answering your question, Seriah.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, I know when those photos were pretty striking when they first came out, and this was once again the 80s, and a lot of people were impressed and convinced with Ed Walters' story, but a lot of it really fell apart, and they found like materials he presumably used to hoax a lot of the...
But you know what, though? They found that, like, in the house that he used to live in after he moved out, and you got to wonder, like, would he intentionally have left that stuff behind?
Well, I don't know.
Or was he someone that started out with a real experience and then started hoaxing it after a point because he needed to continue it?
Could be. I mean, you hear a lot of... stories like that, people who have, especially in the old contactees days, seemed like there was a handful of contactees who had some initial experience and they became UFO famous, spokesmen for the Space Brothers. So they felt they needed, maybe justified in their mind, that it was worth maybe hoaxing or stretching the truth a little bit to get out the larger message about the Space Brothers coming here to warn us not to destroy ourselves.
What do you make of Leer?
John Leer?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, he plays a big part in this story in promoting the whole Dulce base thing. Well, he certainly has, going back to his pilot days, like a lot of these characters, he definitely has some intelligence agency connections. He worked for Air America, doing flights to Laos and Cambodia, during the Vietnam War and that whole era. So he has that background. But then, he plays a prominent role, particularly in the Dulce base story. He really first appeared like in the mid-'80s, and of course his father was William Leer, who invented the Lear jet and also the 8-track player, which is quite an achievement.
Yeah.
And apparently William Leer had some UFO sightings or encounters, and maybe that's what kind of got John Leer involved in it. But I talk about so in 85, 86, he started getting pretty involved, and I talk about there was this conference in Crestone, Colorado, in I think we're talking 1987, with just UFO researchers, some of these same names, David Perkins and Linda Moulton Howe, and a few of the other major players. It wasn't a regular UFO conference. It was a get-together meeting of the minds in Crestone. And at that point, Leer brought them all together during this get-together. And he said, we need to write a position paper or a manifesto, I call it in the book, to outline what is the current situation in ufology. What do we know? So they started going around, putting their heads together, and I think the common consensus, all these folks were cattle mutilation researchers too. The consensus was that UFOs were somehow related to the cattle mutilation phenomena, but Leer wanted to take it even further and say there was an alien invasion, and David Perkins was there, and he told me, he said, well, John, I don't think I can quite go that far, and most of the other people didn't want to stick their necks out. And Leer got he got pissed off about it, and for some reason, him and Linda Moulton Howe left early, and that's another story. I'm not talking about any romantic thing, but it seemed like they were chasing down leads into Dulce and the Bennewitz affair, but also at that get-together was Tom Adams. If you guys are familiar with him, he was like one of the key cattle mutilation researchers, two good friends with David Perkins, really had the early cattle mutilation organization, put out Stigmata, which was really the go-to newsletter keeping track of the phenomenon, the relation to black helicopters. Anyway, there started being a buzz about, this talk about Bennewitz. We're in 1987, so a lot of the Bennewitz story was reaching some of these people, all the details about Dulce Base, etc. And Tom Adams approached John Leer at this Crestone conference and said he had gotten this letter from a lady claiming that she knew a couple of spooky intelligence type military people who had firsthand knowledge of the Dulce Base. And Tom Adams told John Leer that he didn't have time to look into this, but since this lady lived in Las Vegas, maybe Leer could talk to her about follow up on this letter. At the same time, Leer, around this time, had met with Paul Bennewitz. Paul Bennewitz had become less involved in ufology, but something happened in this meeting. Leer went to Bennewitz's house and spent a few days with him, and something bad seemingly happened. Mm-hmm. Bennewitz at that point left ufology for good. Something that gone on between him and Leer, and it appears Leer ended up with some of materials and whatnot, and so he's pursuing this Dulce thing, and so he met with this. I talked about the letter that Tom Adams passed on to him. He met with this lady who went by the name of Ann West at that time, and she brought to him the Dulce Papers, which became pretty famous. I want to mention as a sidebar, before we get into the Dulce Papers, this manifesto that Leer wanted to put together. I think he eventually did his own version of it called the Leer Statement, which took ufology by storm in like late 88, 89, and laid out this whole narrative that took over ufology during this period, elements of which came out of the MJ12 papers and Dulce, that there was this secret joint arrangement, the secret treaty between the humans and the aliens, and that the aliens had welched on the deal, and part of it, they were abducting humans, and that they were even drinking their precious bodily fluids of human babies to stay alive. Sounds, like some of the QAnon stuff coming out, and a number of things. And so this, and William Cooper as well, he got involved in, and they were, he's kind of associated with Leer. They were trumpeting some of these same stories. They both had their little twist on it, that they brought in Roswell and the crash, and there was an alien in captivity somewhere. So that was going on at the same time. Leer met with this Ann West woman who claimed that she knew a guy named Thomas Castello, who was a security worker at Dulce Base. He was head security guy, and he was part of a resistance when they learned that what the aliens were doing with the humans, and they had to shoot them up with the aliens, and most of the human resistance died, but Castello got out of there because he had something called a flash gun, which
Right.
once again goes back to Paul Bennewitz, because Bennewitz also said he had some space gun that could destroy the aliens. So I think, you can see where some of this stuff got taken out of the Bennewitz affair. But anyway, this guy, Thomas Costello, who really didn't exist, the claim was that he got out of Dulce with a bunch of video and photos and his flash gun, etc., and was a whistleblower. And that's basically what the Dulce Papers outline, which were kind of one page's text, but the rest are these hand drawings of aliens and vats and all that type of stuff. I have a resource page at my Chasing UFOs blog that you can link to a lot of these materials if you're interested in seeing the actual Dulce Papers. I imagine a lot of people have seen them already, and so that that kind of began the next stage of the Dulce base mythos in 1988.
And it's so much of this stuff just seems like very very planned out, very connected. Like the spooks had a very set game plan with this stuff, and they just kept finding different ways to reinforce parts of it over the years.
Yeah, and it's hard to draw the line between who were actual spooks and who were people who picked up on some of this stuff and just ran with it. We have to talk about the 89 MUFON convention symposium, whatever they called it, in Las Vegas. And by that time, John Leer was a major player, and he helped organize that event. And that's when he brought out the Leer statement, etc. And there was kind of some warring factions there. The old school MUFON people wanted more nuts and bolts speaker, but Leer wanted to bring in his own people too, as well as himself and Bill Cooper, and they almost had almost split up the conference and went in different directions, but they worked out their difference, etc. But the main speaker there was Bill Moore, who'd been involved in the Bennewitz affair from the get-go, and there was a lot of buzz that he was going to drop, saying call 911 because 911 because Bill Cooper's going to drop a truth bomb. And what he laid out in that, and he didn't actually name Leer by name or Linda Moulton Howe, but he basically said that some of these people had been duped and others were being manipulative by taking the Dulce or the Paul Bennewitz story and basically embellishing upon it to absurd levels, which he was talking about John Leer there, and that he also mentioned Moore mentioned his involvement with the government and how he'd worked in a sense with somebody named high-level intelligence agent named Falcon, and Doty was kind of like the middleman to basically, the deal was they would share with Moore's top secret UFO poop if he would keep an eye on and monitor other people in ufology and at the conferences and the organizations to let them know what was going on. And part of that involved to Doty and that group, Falcon passing on these documents, which were, later passed on to Bennewitz and other folks that Moore realized were disinformation. He got caught up in that, so he kind of blew the whistle on that whole thing at that MUFON conference, which, this caused the whole... I write about it in the book, and if you can track down the actual lot of the footage, it was quite a spectacle. They were ready to drag Moore off the stage and tar and feather him. They felt he had betrayed ufology, but he was basically coming clean with what he knew had transpired during those years.
Yeah. And what was Bill English's reaction there?
Well, yeah, Bill English went off on him for sure. That's pretty kind of humorous stuff. He was a hothead and claimed that. See, a lot of these guys had variations on the story. So English had his own stuff called the Grudge Report 13 that he claimed he got a hold of, and yeah, he was just another one that wanted to tar and feather Bill Moore, and claimed Moore had ripped off like the MJ-12 papers from his Grudge whatever he called it, the Grudge Report.
Right.
And he had a weird place in ufology. He claimed that there was also human mutilations done by the aliens that he had witnessed serving in Vietnam or wherever back in the 60s, and he had witnessed that, and that's how he got involved as a intelligence analyst for the government and got that Grudge Report laid on him when he was working over in the UK after his human mutilation experience, and he claimed that he he'd been given that report by somebody, analyzed it, passed it on, and after that his life went to hell in a handbasket, and they separated himself from his family, and he had to there was several murder attempts on his life, and he later ended up in working for APRO in Tucson, Arizona. Years later, that's when he in the late 70s, he became associated with Moore, who's also an APRO investigator during that time. So you got these competing factions of, much like in some sectors of ufology today,
Sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And then what about Bob Lazar? What's your take on him?
Well, shucks.
That's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, Lazar's always been hard for me because at one point he seems very genuine, but his story is just not viable.
Yeah. The more you look into it, too, it seems like there was an association with Leer and Lazar, and Leer was basically the person who brought out Bob Lazar and introduced him to George Knapp back in the day. But they had an association dating back a few years before that, So I think they went back for a while, and the more you look into it, things just don't add up. And Lazar's and Leer have been involved in a lot of weird kind of capers, but there's parts of his story once again that it's like Lazar claimed, for one, that he had been had seen briefing documents. There's always briefing documents in ufology. Bill Cooper had his briefing documents. The MJ-12 papers were basically briefing documents for Eisenhower, and so Lazar was briefed with this, and one of the documents claimed that there had been a underground base at Area 51, and that there had been a battle between the humans and the aliens, and the same story,
Yeah.
And so, I'm pretty dubious about this. They were, testing a lot of craft out there at Area 51, and it was basically Lazar before, like in 1985, how he became associated with George Knapp was he had passed on information about stealth aircraft testing going on in Area 51, like back in 1985 or so. That's how he first got associated with NAP. So he had some awareness of what was going on there, and it was basically Leer and Lazar and a guy named Gene Huff who were the first ones to go out to Area 51, the black mailbox, that whole thing, right. Freedom Ridge, and actually were witnessing this stuff, and they were kind of leaking it out to the public, whatever it was, So they were key in bringing that in attention to the public, but they're also key, the main promoters of saying that it was most likely alien technology, or that was the narrative that got pushed.
And this was kind of the beginning of what would end up being the 80s, 90s into the 2000s, well, I guess, and even now, UFO conference scene, right? Mm-hmm. These guys are the beginning of that, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, UFO conferences were going on for a while, but you had, at the Little Alien, which was the Rachel Bar and Grill, it got a lot of these, it kind of became a protest movement, and the people involved were there was also an anti-government thing that started there at the Little Alien, where you had Bill Cooper showed up for those. He was trying to, quote unquote, blow the whistle, and Lazar spoke at some of those. John Leer, Norio Hayakawa, he was involved in that scene, and Norio started the probably get this wrong, but it was like the civilian network of UFO watchers that started protesting, because they were starting to get pushed out. They're taking tours there to the black mailbox to witness this stuff. That's when you started hearing the stories about whacking hut goons pushing these guys out. That started kind of an anti-government subset within ufology during that period as well, and even Timothy McVeigh, for instance, came out to some of those protests, and during that period. So that's just another kind of interesting sidebar there, where you started bringing in these anti-government views into ufology.
Yeah.
Or distrust of government. I guess it always been there, but this was became a little bit more militant, especially the Bill Cooper and those factions.
Yeah.
So there's a few more things I want to talk to you about, but maybe we can do that on a Patreon segment. Before we get there, one of the things I wanted to get into the main show is the connections between this stuff and what we're seeing today with To the Stars and that stuff, because I think that's really important to talk about.
And you included, at least, which I'm really glad, that last chapter which starts to touch on that.
Yeah.
I almost ditched that chapter because, like I said, I'd been working on this for a while, and I guess the To the Stars stuff and, the article, the big article in the New York Times and whatever is 2017, so I was kind of tracking this story and writing about it, but it kept growing, and the goalposts kept getting moved, and it's you just want to tear your hair out a while because you can't make sense of all this. Is it BS? Did Lou Elizondo really run the program? Yes, he did. No, there's evidence he didn't. But I guess I talked earlier about some of these same players that had been involved, going back to Project Stargate, Pudoff and Kit Green, and they got involved in something called the Aviary back in the 80s, which was, Doty was involved with, and Bill Moore knew that group, and they were supposedly intelligence agency insiders. John Alexander was another one linked to the Aviary. where they were trying to push disclosure, or some people thought they were pushing disinformation or maybe different agendas. So there was that group in the 80s, and some of those players got involved in like the mid 90s with Robert Bigelow. He came on the scene with NIDS, Hal Puthoff once again. Doty has been linked to NIDS. Lazar, or Bigelow was funding Lazar for a period of time. He had John Alexander involved with NIDS. That's when he purchased the Skinwalker Ranch. So the story continues over time with the TTSA and the secret government program ATIP. And in the initial story that appeared in the New York Times, Robert Bigelow was mentioned. Somehow he's involved with this. They set up a facility there in Las Vegas where they're analyzing metamaterials. That was in that New York Times article, and talks about Lou Elizondo, how he's running this secret program. I've been following this story pretty closely over time, and I have a lot of thoughts about it, what is actually going on, but it seems all related to a lot of these same characters who've been pushing this narrative over the years, and I think there's probably multiple agendas. Some of them are probably true believers, some are lobbying for government contracts, some like Tom DeLonge maybe are kind of in the useful idiot realm.
Yeah, DeLonge seems genuine enough. It's just, but he's also, it seems very gullible with this stuff. He's being, again, handed secret knowledge,
Yeah.
And so I've been dubious about Lou Elizondo from the get-go, but once again, that's, for me to break that down, get pretty deeper than the weeds, I think that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's good because it being in the book, I think helps people if they're looking to the book as a sort of like a touchstone for what like this central line has been since the mid 70s. I think it's important because it's not like it's going away. It keeps on getting repeated in these different iterations.
I felt, I was talking about this, it all kind of led up to this UAP report that everybody was, at least on UFO Twitter, was going nuts about. My position was, what that's going to, there ain't going to be a lot, what'll be in there is unclassified, and it'll basically say that, the government, there have been sightings of these objects, UAPs, UFOs, whatever you want to call them. Some we have identified, we know what they are, and there's a certain percentage that we don't know what they are, and that's, ultimately that's what the report says. But you also got to keep in mind that you talk about patterns for a lot of these stories. A lot of back in the the Doty period, a lot of his sightings. Bennewitz. A lot of his sightings were over Kirtland Air Force Base, over Monsanto's weapons area, which was the largest stash of nuclear weapon components during that period. So you see a lot of these over military bases, and a lot of the videos being promoted by TTSA were, once again, they were over aircraft carriers, these type of situations. So what's going on here? Do they really not know what they were seeing? Or maybe what they were seeing is classified, so they're not going to tell us.
Right, right.
You just don't know.
And people make this assumption that the pilots would have known. And it's like, not if it's classified, they wouldn't have.
Right. I mean, that might have been part of the operation too. And I'm not saying I don't know for sure what they were, but
no.
I'm not.
We can't. But we can't.
Train of thought there. But,
we can't rule things out. Just if a pilot says no, I would know. Well, why would he know? You're not going to be privy to black projects.
Right.
Well, I mean, how would you? That might have been part of the operation. Let's put them out there and see what their reaction is. Mm-hmm. See if they can figure out what they were seeing. That's part of what was going on with a lot of this stuff. Doty and people who were interacting with ufology back in the day, they were, putting out disinformation, but they knew that there was Russians and Chinese and whatever that were infiltrating different UFO organizations, and they wanted to figure out, what they knew, what they were aware of. You take them a UFO or a picture of something, say, this is a UFO, we took a picture out, and they take it and say,
yep.
Oh no, that's I know those. That's I know what that craft is. That's not alien. I'm aware of what that weapon. There's weapon systems or that type of stuff. So it's partly trying to figure out what the adversaries know, and then leading them in the wrong directions. I mean, this goes on. It's gone on forever and continues to go on.
And that
counterintelligence.
That whole report in June, too, basically said the same thing Project Blue Book said, 40, 50 years ago? Mm-hmm. It's like, yes, there are some unknowns. We know what most of these are, but there are some we can't explain.
And Chris was saying, I think when we started, that my book is something, the newbies ought to check out just to get some background. But really, a lot of them who are new the last few years don't want to hear from me. I found out. I can be kind of snarky, too, but I was telling them, getting ahead of your skis here, boys.
Well, I think a lot of the newbies are also charmed by all of this because it's the first time they're encountering it, and they can't imagine that this has happened before.
Yeah, and there's a certain amount of manipulation. I didn't write about this in the book, but, I mean, there was Facebook groups set up, and some of these same players that have been involved in pushing this narrative over the years were interacting with these Facebook, one Facebook group in particular, and bringing people in, and they're the people who get involved or new feel like they're insiders, and they're getting fed this new information, and so you feel empowered and significant, and you're taking a part and ownership in disclosure, which is going to come in 2018. No, 2019. Nope. 2020. Nope. 2021 is the year of disclosure.
And I think it's no coincidence, too, that whether or not this actually gets off the ground, what's his name? The guy who is basically suspected of being, maybe with a couple other people, Q, his new venture is like a UFO clearinghouse site.
Alien leaks.
Alien leaks. There you go. Exactly.
I don't think it did much.
Yeah.
He launched it.
It's actually launched. Well, it goes. Shows you how much of an impact or how much I know.
I think he got more. Recently, he's involved. I don't think it got much traction. Now, he's been involved recently with this Arizona, or actually he with that Mike Lindell character and that site. He's Ron. Okay. Never mind, but
yeah. Well, that's good. At least that site's not become a new hotbed of UFO information.
I don't think so. It was launched, and I wasn't tracking it, but I didn't really hear anymore. And you know how it is. You may not be tracking something real closely on social media, but if it's getting traction, you'll start to hear about it through other people.
Yeah.
what always gets me is that why does anyone believe that the government's going to give them special top secret information?
Mm-hmm. And why is it just the U.S. government alone?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
right.
And I think too, when people have been like Linda Moulton Howe seems like a genuine person, but she's still stuck on these papers she was shown, and like, is that sort of an unconscious? I can't let this go and admit I was wrong because it's everything I've based everything on, or is there a willful? I know this is wrong, but it sells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe it's a kind of a combination of those things. If you repeat it to yourself enough, you start to believe in it,
I think there are a lot of people that are living in their own, private fantasy worlds. Not that we all aren't to some degree.
True, right.
But,
True, absolutely.
Some people that have like less of a consensus, and they really believe some of this stuff. I think it's kind of like faith, religious faith sometimes.
I mean, if it gets pounded into your head or something gets repeated, not to get too political, so I won't, but there's a lot of stuff that gets repeated, right. Like whatever it is, vaccines, election fraud. If you hear it again and again.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you hear a horrible song again and again, you probably will start to kind of like it.
Yeah.
You know what my wife and I keep hearing now, it's embedded in our head, is a Febreze commercial. And it goes, the one I'm talking about? It goes,
no.
Na.
Yes, I do.
You guys know that one?
I do. And now it's going to be stuck in my head tonight.
All right, so we'll cover the rest of the few other things I have left here as a Patreon segment, but tell people where they can find you, Adam.
For the book itself, go to Amazon.com, and it's published by Daily Grill, so go check out Daily Grill as well. I have a website, AdamGorightly.com. I mentioned Chasing UFOs. There's a blog that some interesting UFO stuff there. I can just rattle off. That's enough. I have a few blogs and whatnot, but that's where I'm on Twitter too.
Okay, all right. And of course, Chris, people can find you.
Yeah, well, you can find me at brightrectangle.com, but go specifically to thehilandthehole.com, which is the film that stars Adam Gorightly that Bill Darman and I made a few years ago. So there you go.
All right, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In 2019, the first Strange Realities Conference took place in Nashville, Tennessee. The pandemic and turmoil of the following year could not stop 2020's conference from thriving in cyberspace as a live streaming event. Now, for 2021, the third annual Strange Realities Conference will combine these worlds into a paranormal hybrid event, live in person in Nashville and streaming online. Join us in exploring just how truly strange our reality can be with an interdimensional lineup of speakers presenting unique and intellectual perspectives on magic, mysteries, and the paranormal.
Featuring Alan Greenfield, Dr. J. Michael Bennett, a.k.a. Dr. Future, Tim Banal, Seriah Ascaf, Dr. Stephen Finley, Aaron Gullius, Amy Pachula, Brent Rains, Chris Ernst, Heather Mosier, Michael Hughes, Jose Herrera, Joshua Cutchin, Kiki Dombrowski, Nathan Isaac, P.D. Newman, Steven Snyder, a.k.a. Recluse, David Metcalf, Timothy Renner, Steve Stockton, and Bren Collier. Tickets available at strangerealities.com.
It's going to be amazing.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons for their support. It's all of you that keeps this show going. I particularly want to give a shout out to those pledging $10 or more. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Eric Hervin, Tim, Andrew Nichols, The 100th Monkey Project, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, Alfred Tuttle, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Barbara Fisher, Base FRQ, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Chris Ernst, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, David Moore, Denise Sarek, Diane B., Dominic O'Malley, Edu Camahort, MTK, Eric Citron, Tyler H. Glimstad, Eric Todd, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, Joanna Rojas, John Bracken, Duffy Dowder, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Kristen L., Layla Malden, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Matt in Delaware, Matthew Sproul, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Roger Gonzalez, Sam Sharon, Sedgder, Stone Wilderness, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, 36 Dingo, Vincent Trewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, William Lovelace, and Ren Collier. Thank you all so very much for your support. Once again, Adam Gorightly's book is Saucers, Spooks and Kooks, UFO Disinformation in the Age of Aquarius, and I can't recommend it enough. It is a fantastic read. It's both fun and very insightful on how all this stuff works, or the best we can figure out how it all works and what's going on. And it's just leaves you, like a lot of this stuff, with more questions than answers in a lot of cases. Anyway, if you enjoyed that, there is a continuation. We finish off with some questions I had for Adam in a Patreon segment that is probably almost as long as the actual show, probably about 45 minutes to an hour long. So if you enjoyed that, become a patron. It's only $3 a month. It helps us immensely keep the show going. So you can do that at wheredidtheroadgo.com. There's a link right at the top for Patreon. Go there and subscribe and help us out. You can also help us out by sharing the show, rating us high on whatever podcatcher you're listening to us on, leaving a good review. All that stuff helps a lot. So if you like the show, help us get the word out. It means a lot. And of course, if you do like metal and heavier music, check out my music show, The Last Exit for the Lost, at www.thelastexit.org. And I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.